I'm going to get started, and I want to start by saying thank you to Adeline and the adult formation team for scheduling a couple of Sundays for me to share some reflections. I invited you to be in touch with me if you had particular questions, and I heard from 5 of you, and we'll weave those questions into what I have to say. I see that there are a number of you here today, so you may be hoping or expecting or imagining that I'm going to address something, and I don't know what you might be hoping or imagining. The good news is there's a microphone in the center aisle, and so I'll share some responses to the questions I have received, and then you can let me know what it is you'd like to hear otherwise. And one of the questions that felt like a generous start was what has been a favorite event or experience that I've had in my time at St. Columba's. And rather than naming a single event or experience, what I want to do with that is to speak on what is, to me, the most essential part of parish ministry. And you've heard me say this before, I hope, because I hope it has come through. And the most essential part, in my understanding, begins with understanding the church as the Apostle Paul described it, which is to say the church as the body of Christ, with one God, one Spirit, and many, many gifts and many, many members. Just to ground us in that, from Paul's first letter to the church in Corinth, chapter 12, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of services, but the same Lord. There are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. And just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, "Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body," that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, "Because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body," that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them, as God chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, "I have no need of you," nor again the head to the feet, "I have no need of you." On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect, whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. The way I translate that into organizational leadership is that Christ is the head of the body. Each and all of us are vitally integral parts of the body. and my ministry and the ministry of all of you who share in leadership is to pay deep, deep attention to the connective tissue that holds us together. Whether that's the bloodstream or the nervous system or the sinews of the body, lest anyone be left out or abandoned or any part of the body become overly imbalanced. And that has been core to what I view as creating and nourishing health within the body. And that being said, my favorite events or moments or experiences have been when it has felt like the body has come together and the body is paying attention, each of us, to one another and honoring and respecting the fullness of who we are. And there have been countless moments when we have been here in this space in worship, as the song lifts our hearts, or somebody shares their faith story, or the prayers that are whispered or spoken aloud for our world or for ourselves in moments of brokenness, a sermon preached, bread broken, a little child running up the aisle eager. All of those are times when we connect and feel like we're part of something far greater than we could ever make ourselves. And those feel so rich. I will say a couple of other things. Where we really felt it is during the pandemic, or where I really felt it during the pandemic, where we were called upon to be more creative and innovative because we didn't know how to be church. With the church being closed. And up until that point, we, the staff, had been operating under the guideline that anything that was going to succeed at St. Columba's needed to be really thought through and planned before it got launched. And we just threw that out the window and said, you got an idea? Let's try it. And if it works and gets a little traction, then we'll see if we can put some resources into it. And if it doesn't, then we'll try something else. And anything can happen. That generated creativity. I would say another thing where it really felt like the body coming together is as we collectively, but guided by a vision planning team and the leadership of the vestry back in 2018-19, were able to re-articulate or articulate afresh a vision and mission and plan for our ministry that culminated as a gift of the Spirit in our articulating that we are a church on a mission to live God's love, and that has continued to reverberate outward. When I first arrived here, one of my predecessors, Jim Donald, who I had not previously met, called me up to congratulate me. And I always remember, he said, I think, Ledlie, that you will find this to be a fairly muscular congregation. And it is a fairly muscular congregation. And that can pinch or hurt sometimes, but for the most part, it's an extraordinary thing, because when we set our heart to something, our capacity is extraordinary. And I've felt that through the work of our mission. It was compelling and powerful when we committed in 2020 to including in our mission, our commitment to become an anti-racist church. It's been compelling for me. This is not so much integrating with all the body of all y'all, but every Tuesday morning during the school year from 8:15 to 8:45 a.m., which are the busiest traffic times on this corner, I stand out there with a little sign that says, let's ask the priest at the corner, and offers a blessing and a prayer. And the conversations I have, the prayers I have with little children, with people on their way to the metro, with people coming from the metro to work in this residential neighborhood have been such a gift. So those are just a few of things. The same person that asked me, what are your favorite things, then also asked, what effect will my departure have on our capital campaign? And I thought, well, okay, that was a cleverly paired set of questions. What effect will my departure have on our capital campaign is the first question that members of the vestry asked when I shared with them my intention to retire. And we asked our campaign consultant, and he was ready with an answer, and he said it depends entirely on whether the congregation perceives that the vision and goals being advanced in that campaign are yours, Ledlie, or if they come from the congregation as a whole. What I want to do with that question is turn it back around and say, what effect will my departure have on our capital campaign depends entirely on you. It is in your hands. I think that's where the answer lies. I know that at this point, a vast majority of parishioners have heard just an outline of the goals, but I believe that the vestry has done an extraordinary job over the course of several years of gathering up information about what we need for our property, to take care of our property, to address current needs, to prepare ourselves for the future. This has been traveling along a path. At the same time, we've looked at our finances and the importance of having a secure financial foundation and building up our endowment. At the same time, this has been traveling along a path as we have lived into what does it mean for us to continue to address racial justice. We've looked at what the prospects are for best and highest use of the property that we own on the corner of 42nd and Butterworth, where Fletcher House currently sits. And I don't want to get into the whole campaign thing. That was last week's forum, and there are going to be many opportunities. Our campaign team is committed to visiting as many households as will be visited. That's all of you. I hope each of you who are not already I see a lot of you who have already had an opportunity to make a pledge or have stepped up to participate in the campaign. Thank you. All of you will be visited, and especially if you wish to and you want to be visited sooner rather than later, raise your hand and we will have somebody there this week. Could be me. This is a top priority. I do want to take that question opportunity to say that I think that the vestry has done an extraordinary job of honing down a host of different possible things and getting it tight and down to the essentials. Things that our property are going to advance our mission, our commitment, developing partnerships outside of ourselves through a beloved community fund, are taking care of the property on the street corner. And I will also say that the way we've framed this is that we are true to our values without overly prescribing what the incoming new rector needs to do right away, so that there's a lot of flexibility and freedom for the new rector, your new rector, and your vestry to work together in determining next steps. And that felt very important to us. Another question I was asked is, how has the church changed during my ministry, my lifetime? This was not about St. Columba's, this was about the Episcopal Church. That was an interesting thing to reflect on. What I want to do is just run through some dates and then just share a couple of thoughts. So I was born in 1959. 1964 was the peak year of membership for the Episcopal Church. We peaked at 3.4 million members in 64. 1967, I was living in Newark, New Jersey. My dad was the dean of the cathedral there, and that's when Newark, in the summer of 67, broke out in riots. Race and racial tension has been an underlying part of the life of the church and my experience in it. 1974 is when women were first ordained. 1979, I was living with my family in the West Village in Manhattan. Dad was then at a church called St. Luke in the Fields, which is right on the corner of Christopher Street. And in 1979 is when our Book of Common Prayer was last revised. And that put the involvement of parishioners in a way that we take for granted in our worship today was central. Prior to that, those of you that grew up in the previous chapters from the 1920s onward would have had a much more priest-centric experience of liturgy, where I would have been saying everything and praying for all of you. And our 79 prayer book really shifted that dynamic dramatically. 1989, the year I was ordained, is probably the height of the AIDS epidemic. A huge thing that's shifted, 1999, it may not have gotten a lot of attention in the press, but we approved something called Called to Common Mission, and that was the concordat of agreement that brought the Episcopal Church of America and the Lutheran Church of America into full communion. And I say that because one of the themes that I see during the course of my ministry is that it's overlapped with what I believe future historians will look back and say, this is the time of the end of the age of denominationalism in America. There is relatively little allegiance to denominations anymore. Some of us have it deeply, we grew up in it, but most of us in America find a church for a variety of reasons that has little to do with a denominational allegiance, whether it's the location or the preacher or the children's program or the music program or whatever it is. So I think we're in the middle of a reformation, truly, within America. 1999 was when we formally did that. What that means just on a practical level is, for your next rector, you could call an ordained Lutheran pastor. And it's fully inclusive. 2003 is when the church ordained Bishop Eugene Robinson as Bishop of New Hampshire, the first out gay bishop in the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Communion. And even though that trajectory, there was a path that could go way back. It goes actually back to the very beginning of who we are as people of faith. But with that step and the price it cost the church, as you know, entire churches, entire dioceses left the Episcopal Church. That was the shift in which the Episcopal Church as a whole said, we are going to prioritize, of the values, we're going to prioritize love and the inclusion of one and all as central in how we understand what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. And that is, with that, there was a price paid in terms of those folks who said, we think that what we must do first and foremost is be the keepers of tradition or followers of the letters of the law, and that's also been a part of our Christian tradition. But the Episcopal Church as a whole said, we're prioritizing inclusion and welcome in a way that was very dramatic and compelling. As part of that inclusiveness, again, a little thing that has had huge implications. I don't know what St. Columba's was doing, but I'm going to guess you were one of many of the churches that recognized that since we're welcoming everybody, and there are a lot of us that have come and were not raised in the Episcopal Church, it's really complicated to worship with us if you have to juggle 3 books at the same time. Some of you may not even know what I'm talking about, but you will find in a rather musty way in the seat under you or in front of you a Book of Common Prayer. We used to have that book and the hymnal and another hymnal, and we would be moving them around and standing up and down, and if it was fine for those of us that had gotten our, we were all limber, but for those who were new, so we put it all in one bulletin. What that means is there are now many people who have next to no familiarity with the Book of Common Prayer. And that's going to have significant implications for what happens, since the thing that has unified the Anglican Communion and the Episcopal Church is common worship, especially as increasingly dioceses have given free license for us to do things like add creation prayers as we worship with today that have different creeds and prayers. And so 2006, we consecrated Catherine Jefferts Shorey as first woman presiding bishop in the Anglican Communion. And then I seem to be jumping way ahead. 2020, COVID. So how has the Episcopal Church changed? Well, in my lifetime, we've gotten a lot smaller. So I mentioned that in 64 was the peak. That was 3.4 million. We're currently at 1.5. 3.4 to 1.5. I don't know if there are any demographers in the congregation. Demographers call that a systemic decline, which in the lingo is a very challenging thing to reverse in any scenario. 2020 with COVID did some interesting things across the Episcopal Church. On the whole, it thinned the herd. Churches that were struggling couldn't make it. It made it, we're seeing a real shift in the model of what the average Episcopal Church looks like. It is no longer a sustainable model for a congregation to have a building, a full-time priest, a part-time musician, part-time property person, part-time administrator. The dollars just don't add up. So people are being creative. St. Columba's is an outlier. We are in the very top percentile of churches within the Episcopal Church in terms of our vitality, the membership, the numbers of members, our dollars. People have all kinds of projections about where that's headed and what's going to work. All these years that I've been in parish ministry, there's been a tension between, well, in order to thrive into the future, we need to stick to what we have done best forever and ever, and that means that we ought to do Anglican choral evensong and chant and stick to our beautiful Elizabethan language, and others have said that's what's dragging us back. We need to open the doors and do everything different. Tends to be the case that churches don't thrive on whether they do Anglican choral evensong or have inclusive modern language. It has to do with the vitality and the engagement of the body and the fullness of the body, because they're both examples thriving. I mean, the greatest evensong you could find, or one of the greater evensongs you could find, is in Seattle, of all places, where Christians are a scarce thing out there. But anyway, in that, in any measure, so that's all rearranging furniture. The core thing, in my understanding of the church, and if we look to the future, is the fundamental conviction that God is faithful and God is true. And the church has lived and thrived and failed and shifted for 2 millennia plus. And God isn't finished. And God is going to somehow be doing new things in our midst. And there are all sorts of shifting pains institutionally as we grapple with that. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be pain as little congregations struggle with the reality in their own places. But God isn't finished, and God is going to do a new thing with and through us. And it's also the conviction that we have been gathering as people of faith for millennia because we need one another, and we need to find the face of God in one another, and we do that. And the vitality of this congregation in this community and the effect it has for people is extraordinary. I answered that as I folded into another question, which is, where do I see the Episcopal Church from 10 years from now? I think I'll leave it there. The last question I've got, and then if you've got questions for me, somebody asked, what are your plans for retirement? And I will say that I have devoted my life, the last 35 years of my life, to parish ministry. And I have put the better part of all of my energy and self into that effort. And I am very curious to see what emerges from within, if that is not the primal focus of my energy. I don't know what it's going to be. If I am not worried about staff and budgets and each and every single one of you and how you are and how your mother is and how that marriage is going and how our next plan is going to be, I don't know what's going to emerge. I know it's going to connect me deeply to family. I have 2 grandchildren and another one on the way. I think it's going to give me an opportunity to connect more deeply to family of the past. I want to write. I know a lot about a lot of my ancestors, and I feel like they've been clamoring for my attention, and I don't know how to access that, except I'm going to try writing about it. And I know some things about them, but I want to start with some facts, but I don't want to constrict myself to facts. I think there's an opportunity to be creative as I bring those stories forward. I don't know the ways in which I will find to continue to share my faith. I am a person that I thrive on my practices of prayer individually and corporately, and I don't see those changing. I just don't know where I'm gonna go with that. So stay tuned. I'll write letters from beyond. That's what I have prepared. I'd love to know if there's something that brought you here that you'd be interested to hear me reflect or opine upon. And I need you to go to the microphone so that those of us who may be joining in this on live stream can participate as well. Please, just tell us your name before you speak.
2 questions came to my mind that you can address as you wish. One is life lessons that you have learned as being a parish minister for all these years that you would give to those of us that are still here doing this, just whatever they might be as it relates to the most important life lessons you've learned, and then 2, how your theology might have changed or not through the years. Thanks.
I figured it would just be a little question. I think, thank you. My answer to the life lessons one is stick to your knitting, by which I mean, I can't remember, some wise sage said, I pray for an hour a day, except for when life gets really hard, and then I pray for 2 hours a day. What I have consistently found is that need, and I do commend this to each and every single one of you, is that, and this became very clear for me when before coming to St. Columba's, and I stepped into a role as the president of the Standing Committee of the Diocese of Pennsylvania, and that's the governing board of a diocese, and I was tasked with removing the bishop. Bishops don't like to be removed for the most part, and this one did not like it. And what I discerned is that in order to be able to do that, is that I needed to really double down on making sure that I was giving time and energy to my own personal practice of prayer, that I was giving time and energy to spending time with Sarah, my wife, and my family, and I was spending time with paying attention to my physical well-being and my exercise and vitality. And so when I say stick to your knitting, that's a core life lesson. I mean, there may be more, but I'll leave it there. The second had to do with theology and what's shifted, I think, something like that. I will point to, let's see, a core piece in this. I spoke about this in a sermon a little bit, a couple, whenever it was last week. Is this consistent with Celtic theology? Was a book that I read in the first parish that I served, second parish I served out of seminary, which was right around the corner, St. Patrick's, over on Whitehaven Parkway. And I read a book called Original Blessing by a man named Matthew Fox, who was a Dominican scholar until Rome expelled him and he became an Episcopal priest. And he proposed that theologians through the millennia had overemphasized our focus on original sin and the need for redemption. And he said that's all part of it. It is essential. But beneath and core, but before that is our original blessing, that we are created in the image of God and we are beloved of God. And we need to take hold of that and live from that place. And that has allowed a greater sense of freedom and focus on, for me, the incarnation. And the prospect that God is forever seeking to be born anew through us and through our lives. I'll pause there. There could be some other things I might say, but please.
I'm Magali Slosky. This change of your retirement is a big change for the parish, and you are doing a lot, and the parish is doing a lot to make sure that it's positive for us. What, as a parish, can we do to ensure that this transition is also a blessing for you, Ledlie?
Thank you. My first response is to say it already is. It will be a blessing for me to see you collectively continue to step forward with faith in God, that God is going to be the light upon your path. And I'm aware that there is my departure brings up some sense of anxiety of what lies ahead. Certainly there is an unknown of what lies ahead. It brings up some anxiety because it's been challenging during some of the seasons of transition that you all have gone through. I believe that I don't have any doubt that the Spirit of God is going to be in your midst and that is going to work through you, and that you are going to discern and call someone who will be very different from me and also a real blessing and the person that you all need. I don't know how that's going to come about. I know your vestry is really eager to know how that's going to come about. Some of them are laughing nervously, probably, as I speak. But for me, the blessing for me is for you to be able to say thank you and goodbye, and we're okay too. And I believe you are.
Karen Burgess, I know you've lived in Asia.
Yes.
Has there been anything in the Asian religious traditions that have inspired you?
Thank you, Karen. Yes, absolutely. So I have lived in Asia. I was in East Asian Studies. I had a chance to travel widely around the world between high school and college. And that led me to study East Asian culture and religion in college, Oberlin. And that led me back to Kyoto, where I immersed myself in the practice of the Japanese tea ceremony, which is deeply shaped by Zen Buddhism, Soto Zen in particular. And it was really, even though as I've said, my dad was a priest. I grew up in the church. I was an acolyte in the church all the time. It was really through Zen meditation that I began to pray in a contemplative way on my own. And it was through practicing Zen meditation in Kyoto that I had, I think, arguably my first real experience of the presence of Christ in my prayer. I was praying with the psalm that says, "I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord." And I just felt glad that I wanted to go into the house of the Lord. And I have, through the years since, I have come to see my path, and this is not new. This is, many people would say this. The path is circular rather than linear. And so I find myself coming back around, sometimes anew, as if for the very first time. And what that has been for me is I have sometimes felt myself led to go wander out of mainstream Christianity and dabble over here and see what it is to pray with these folks or to pray with those folks. I mentioned earlier the Concordat of Agreement that the Episcopal Church and the Lutherans came up with. In order to get there, that requires a whole lot of sort of academic, what do we do with all of our doctrines and our practices? I'm not really interested in that. What I am interested in is what happens if we pray together. What happens if we sit together? And I have found that through our contemplative prayer, we can be spiritually multilingual, and that we can connect deeply with one another. I'd also like to think that my practice of the tea ceremony, which is very prescribed, it's like studying ballet, has shaped how I am in this space. Don't know if it shows up to anything you can see, but for instance, in the tea ceremony, or in sharp angles are considered unattractive. It is much more attractive to be rounded. And somewhere early on, as I'm moving around the altar, I thought, okay, I can't, don't do this, Ledlie. Do this. And there's just, I don't know if it makes any difference, but it's an intention in my heart that guides it. So, thank you. Probably the last one. Let's have it, Bill.
Okay,
What do you got?
I guess. Ledlie, you talked about Jim Donald forewarning you about the muscular congregation. I'm curious, was there anything else that surprised you when you got here?
All of it? Anything else that surprised me? And I'm looking over at Jennifer. Jennifer had just been the warden here. I was aware that I didn't know how to be most effective in leading a congregation this size. I shared that with the congregation my first Sunday here. I'd never been in a church like this. And as I said at the time, I'm smart enough to know that in order to be an effective leader of this congregation, I'm going to need to lead differently than I ever have. But I don't have any idea what that means or is going to look like. And so I said, we're going to have to figure that out together. And I feel like we did. I relied heavily upon, I called upon created an HR team. Patty Jensen knows something about that, having moved from being co-chair of the search that brought me here. I asked if Patty would lead an HR team that would help me think through, how do I think through the relationships, especially with the staff. Found a coach to help me get clear on visions and priorities. Surprises. It's all been a surprise, Bill. Every single moment. And I'm grateful. So, thank you all very much.